Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's been a while. I wanted to check in with everybody and wish you well, basically, and to talk about what's going on in my own studio for a few minutes. Um, I think I've kind of come around to this concept through the back door with you in saying that for me, a great way to begin making art is to have some stuff. Like right now, one of the things I'm working on is a kind of a birthday. This is a bit of a commission. A friend of mine is having a birthday, and we've been instructed to send hearts. So I have a kind of a painted panel here, sort of dark brown panel, and I want to put a heart on it, but I don't. That's not right. I think I want a gold heart, but I might want it to be quite small in the middle. This is a fabric heart that I might tack onto the gold square and tack the gold square onto the wood panel. I'm not sure yet. But why I bring this up is because I kind of have this and I have that and I know I want to use those things. And so I sort of start messing around with them. And that's not the only way to begin making something. You can start with an idea, or you can start with a sketch, or you can start with just thinking, well, I want to make something. And if you're in the just, I want to make something zone, it can be helpful to have some materials around to mess around with. And you remember this item, or maybe you don't. This is about done. It's going to sort of stand on its end like this. You remember this is this sort of funny piece of foam that I had, and a bunch of weird, ugly half plastic pearls, meaning they were half spheres. And I stuck them on there, and then I stitched it in a kind of a little like pattern to make it a little bit bumpy. I used a bunch of silk on top, and then I nailed it to this piece of wood. Now, I want to talk about that for a minute. There's one more thing to do, which involves nail polish. I love to use things like that, like nail polish. Why? Well, in this case, I like the nail polish because it's kind of feminine. It's kind of pearlescent. It's not the typical art material. And I'm just going to put it on. I've already done it. You can't really tell. But I didn't like the nails. I have a lot of little brads. I have some copper ones, some aluminum colored ones, some steel ones, some little black tacks, and none of them were right. And you're probably thinking, you had to try all those? Well, I did, because it did matter to me. Even though this is sort of made of old junk, it had to be just right. So I found that what I wanted was the small steel nails, but I didn't want them to be to have as much contrast as they would if I'd left the steel kind of showing. So I painted all these with one color of nail polish that I had, and then I wanted to put another color on because I value the way that glazing or layers of paint can build up a rich texture or surface, even on something as tiny as that, right? And that maybe seems a little bit obsessive, but I think that art making and artists are a little bit obsessive. And that brings me to another thing, the stipulations. I was going to call them rules. Like I had rules about how this would be assembled, even though I wasn't sure what I was doing with it, or even if it means anything or what it might mean. And the stipulations, I decided to call them stipulations instead of rules because that seemed more, I don't know, a little bit more intentional and a little less restrictive, right? Rules sound like, oh, great, now I got to go do that. I wanted it to be more like, well, I have these guidelines, these things I want to accomplish with it, but they're not exactly rules. They can be bent or changed or moved. One of the stipulations that I have with the weird sculpture things that I like to make is that they be kind of made of stuff that's sort of hanging around, because I worry a little bit about the footprint of the artist, right? Always using a bunch of new materials and making big things that maybe nobody wants. So for me, one way to deal with that issue has been to use sort of found or discarded items. Another thing that was important to me is I don't like, it's fine, I use glue. I don't not use glue. That sounds a little insane. How could you get by making things? Glue is a wonderful thing. I don't like always to use glue to attach things. There's just something in my mind about having the attachment system. What that is to say, how this foamy thing was attached to this junky wood. I want it to be apparent. I want the viewer to be able to see how that was put on there. So if I'd have glued it, I wouldn't have had to maybe mess with nail polish and painting tiny brads, but I would have had the problem of the invisible connector, which I just don't like. That seems so weird. But each little thing, like the reason that it mattered that it was silk, right? Even though they were like plastic things I was covering, that mattered to me. Like intention and kind of the quality of the materials kind of matters to me, which is, I know, seems probably kind of ironic because it's sort of just stuff that people would throw out. Anyway, so I wanted to use nails and not to use glue. And in fact, I tried wire. I tried like wrapping it, and I considered like drilling through the wood and kind of like stitching it basically to this piece of wood. It could also go like this. But ultimately I went with the nails. Although one thing I didn't like about the nails, and why am I going to all this trouble? Because I kind of want you to understand that if you're making decisions like this, if you're thinking, oh, not that, but I'm not exactly sure why not that, those are the right decisions. You're doing it right, right? Okay. Anyway, I didn't like how it echoed the same rounded form that the half plastic sphere pearl was. I thought, oh, it's a lot of little bumps, right? Just more bumps, more bumps. On the one hand, if there's a lot of bumps, great, just pour in more. But at some point, sometimes there can be too much repetition of the same kind of form. And which is one of the reasons that sort of hiding it a little bit by painting it made it better for me. But anyway, I ended up not minding it. But that was one of the things I was worried about, is the way it was going to kind of like wrinkle these edges even further and make it even more dimpled than it is. But ultimately, I think it's all right. And when I say I think it's all right, it's almost at the point where I'm going to paint just a little bit more on these nail heads, and I'm going to call this thing done. What it is and what it might mean to a viewer, that's for the viewer to decide. All right, other things that are going on in the studio. I'm also working on sewing together. Remember, I like to use things that are sort of around already. I had a lot of pieces of fabric left over from sewing projects, and I made a kind of a coverall, like an apron thing with a friend. And there was this piece cut out of it, which I thought was just great. This like patchwork of this big circle. So then in making the apron, I thought, well, what I want to do with this is sew this like onto a skirt, right? So I've got underneath this computer, there's some fabric out that I'm going to attach that circle to. And I guess the reason I wanted to talk about making things that aren't the same is that they inform each other. Sometimes I get irritated with the word art because it implies like a kind of a limit, like this is art and that is not art, kind of thing. And I don't, I feel a little bit hemmed in by those rules and limits. So to flip from making, kind of a sculpture out of kind of sewing stuff and kind of a skirt out of sort of, artfully composed squares of fabric is perfectly natural. It's just what we should be all doing. So if you're making things, you're engaging yourself in the world in a way that I think is meaningful and worthwhile, even if what you're making is biscuits, okay? I think that's all I have to say today. It's not that much, but I did want to check in with you, and I hope everything's going well. And if you are missing me, if you want to talk, just send me an email and we can set up a private Zoom, or of course, you're always welcome to come to the Help and Social Hour. Anyway, take care. That's all.